Thanks, Emily. And it's good to see that you're actually using road mapping yourself inside of the organization. How do we move from now to the future? Where do we see our organization in 5, 10, or 15 years? I'm going to show you the framework that underpins it all.
Hello, and welcome everyone to this live ITONICS Academy course on strategic road mapping in practice. We are so happy to have you join us today. I'm Emily, a senior innovation consultant here at ITONICS, and I'll be your host for today's session. And we're very fortunate to have with us here Dr. Clemens Chaskel as our guest lecturer on today's course, whom I will introduce in just a moment. So now, if you're joining us fresh from last week's webinar, welcome back. And if you're a regular ITONICS Academy participant or new to road mapping altogether, we're equally glad to have you. This session is designed as a practical follow-up to our previous webinar. And while the webinar provided a broader overview of road mapping's purpose and potential, today's focus is all about putting the methodology into action. So we know the audience here represents a mix of roles and road mapping experience. Some of you might already be experimenting with your own approaches, others just starting out. And our goal over the next 45 minutes is to give you hands-on advice, real examples, and simple starting points that you can adapt to your own context. And we want you to be a part of this discussion as well. So please drop any questions you have in the chat box, and we will collect them to be answered throughout or at the end of this course. And to help us answer these pressing questions and share his road mapping expertise with us today, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Clemens Chaskel. Clemens is an industrial associate at the IfM Engage, which is the knowledge transfer arm of the Institute for Manufacturing at the University of Cambridge. He's spent the past 15 plus years helping organizations across sectors use road mapping to tackle complex decisions, to align teams, and build innovation capabilities that last. Today, he's here to guide us through what practical, impactful road mapping looks like and how you can make it stick. Clemens, great to have you back with us.
Thank you, Emily. Very glad to be here.
So yeah, let's get into the topic. Obviously, roadmaps kind of come at the heart of strategy. And I think there's a lot of different purposes around road mapping, and it's very important to also start with that, start with the why. Can you talk a bit about that?
So let's just jump straight in. Okay, so like Emily said, I've been spending the last 15 odd years working with organizations around the globe on road mapping, and the challenge that we always find is how do organizations actually get started with it? Because just like you've heard about road mapping, you've probably dabbled with the road mapping module in ITONICS here or there. But the question is, how do you get the best use of it? How do you implement road mapping in your organization in a meaningful way? And that's essentially what we're trying to cover in today's session. And then build up on it, go into some more details, bring in some different perspectives in the subsequent ones. So today, let's get started with the motivation for road mapping. Why would you even want to do it? And I would like to start with that picture here, which is a roadmap from ITONICS. And I think Emily can probably say a few words about that. But just at the first glance, what we see here is products, technologies, and how they're all connected together. It's essentially a picture of our strategy. And that's really where we're coming from when we're talking about road mapping at the IfM, is that we're saying road mapping for us, it's not a different way of doing strategy, or it throws away all the previous approaches that you've done, but it's essentially the picture that brings everything together. But Emily, since this is your picture, would you like to say a few words about that?
Yeah, thanks, Clemens. So I'm going to go into a few examples a bit later on, but I think this is a sort of a great exemplary roadmap here because we have the swim lanes or the different layers on the left and the timeline on the top. And while there's lots of different activities on this and a lot of different colors and icons, What we will emphasize throughout this too is that you can start quite simply, and there are different types of roadmaps for different purposes. One of the biggest benefits is the conversation that it can start. And so if you have a roadmap like this that talks about, for the purpose of sustainability in your organization, sustainability is a topic that is going to naturally bring together people from across the organization in different functions and departments. And a roadmap is an amazing way to see those connections between the different departments and get that big picture overview and the level of detail or granularity, which I think Clemens will talk about a little bit next, that can be different depending on your audience. I think what's most important, again, is the people that it's going to bring together, the conversations that it starts, and the actions that it spurs.
Thank you, Emily. And I think you touched on some important points here, because in the end, the roadmap, it's essentially just a picture of your strategy. But as you notice, our title is not the roadmap for the series, but it's about road mapping. So it's the process of generating this that is immensely important. And coming back to a simpler picture here, a roadmap for us is a means for structuring your strategic discussions. It doesn't mean that you have to throw all your other strategy tools out of the window, but you have to understand, if you're looking at a competitor analysis, what does that mean? How does it fit to your products? How do you address the market requirements with particular features that are market specific? How do you link it up to your technology base and the capabilities you have in the firm? All of those perspectives are brought in when we're going through the process of creating a roadmap. And that's why this entire approach is so immensely powerful. And then the outcome, the roadmap itself, that's just an artifact that brings everything together, but it's the process that generates those insights for you. And just to reiterate that point of how, in the end, it's the visuals that are the result, but they are not just the entire journey. I've got those two pictures here. Completely different at first glance, but actually when we're thinking about it, almost the same content, obviously at different flight heights. But on the left, it's different programs, the technical side of everything that's happening. On the right side, it's the same messaging, just as a much different flight height. And technically, we can call both of them roadmaps. And I think that highlights the power of this approach, that we're not stuck in one certain way, but we can adapt it to our audience, to the type of stakeholders that we want to address here. And I always jokingly say that the left side is almost for the technical experts in the firm, the ones who really work on the details, that understand everything behind it. Whereas the right side, and this is said jokingly, somehow, it's almost for someone who has an attention span of 30 to 60 seconds until they decide, do I want to have further insights on this or not? And that could be a toddler, but it could also be a very busy CEO who needs to quickly understand, what is the key takeaway message here, before then going into detail and diving into the insights through the support of, for example, an underpinning roadmap. And we'll be talking about that concept later on, how we've got multiple hierarchical roadmaps essentially supporting the content of each other in a structured way in order to convey the information in the most logical sense. Now, this is just a picture that you see floating around in road mapping literature a lot, but here's an example from Emily, and I'll let Emily talk about that.
Yes, thanks, Clemens. Yes, and exactly as you're saying, it's important to think about, to always ground your roadmap in who is this for, and what do you want to achieve or what do you want them to achieve or take away from using this roadmap? And so here on the right is an example from our client, Bayern Innovativ, which is a publicly funded innovation agency based in Bavaria. And this is a roadmap focused on additive manufacturing in the region. What you see here is just one layer of what is actually a larger multi-layer roadmap covering market drivers, applications, quality assurance, material, software, and more. So it may seem complex at first, but if you take a closer look, which you can actually do so because this is publicly available on their website, which I think is another interesting point to share because, again, that speaks to the audience. Who is this for? But if you take a closer look, you'll see that the level of detail within each activity is kept relatively light. You're not seeing dozens of subtasks or precise resource breakdowns. So they've designed this roadmap for a broad audience. Companies, startups, research institutes who are working on additive manufacturing. And the aim is not to tell organizations what to do, but to rather help structure the conversation and highlight key priorities and dependencies across domains. So even with the many layers that this roadmap actually has, if you view it online, this is still what I'd call a simple roadmap in the best sense. It helps make sense of a complex system without becoming overwhelming, showing the relationships and sequences, the gaps, but leaving room still for discussion and iteration, alignment, as any good roadmap should. And then next on the left, we have a busier, more complex, more granular roadmap. I know it's probably quite small on your screen, but this one is actually courtesy of our own ITONICS engineering team. So this is really an operational roadmap used by our product and development teams to coordinate initiatives across multiple work streams. And each layer represents a core area of ongoing development, and each activity is time-bound and color-coded based on activity type, like research, test, back-end implementation, and others. So there's also and I also want to point out, again, it's probably quite small, but actually what you see on both of these is that there's a lot of linkages or dependencies, especially on the roadmap on the left, which you can see through the sort of connected lines between the activities. And that helps us visualize not only what's planned, but also how things rely on one another. And although this roadmap is more complex than the one on the right, the core principle is the same. So at ITONICS, we use this to create alignment across teams and across timelines and priorities. And also, if you're a client of ours, then trust that we are working hard on a lot of new, exciting product features here.
Thanks, Emily. And it's good to see that you're actually using road mapping yourself inside of the organization. You touched on some important points there, like the linkages, and we'll actually get back into some details later on to explain what those linkages mean, how you use them, and why they're so of utmost importance for the roadmap. But let me just finish off this chapter here by essentially saying that for me, there is no excuse for organizations to not do road mapping. If you do road mapping, you don't have to go overly complex. You can, like Emily showed, just do a very light touch roadmap that already helps you align between different divisions or between different stakeholder groups. It shows the organization where you want to go. It helps you break down silos and really deal with also knowledge gaps that you might have in the firm that you previously haven't even realized until you started putting all the puzzle pieces together and realized, well, there's actually a puzzle piece missing here. So you don't have to go overboard. You can do it very light touch. And because of that, my opinion is that every firm should be looking at road mapping if they're not doing that already, because it doesn't actually bring any downsides, but rather brings a lot of clarity into your firm. So take a look, and like I say, don't have to go overboard at the beginning. So now you're all probably asking yourself, okay, great, we understand what road mapping is all about, what the hype is, but what is it actually and how do I get started? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about where road mapping originated, how it has developed over the last decades, and what the current state of thinking is when it comes to employing road mapping inside of industrial organizations or any other sector that might make use of it. There's actually a little side note. So it originated from manufacturing, but road mapping is applicable to all sectors, to financial sectors, to industrial sectors. Even non-profit organizations can benefit from it in various areas. So, take a look at it. But let's start with the origins as they are perceived in literature. So I wasn't born at that point. Actually, I was, but very young. So I base my knowledge on the literature that's out there, and everything points back to Motorola. Motorola essentially pioneered this whole road mapping approach long time ago. And what they did is something very clever. They started mapping out the different technologies that they were looking at over a timeline to show what are the iterations that we're doing across our technology clusters, technology areas, so that they can understand what will find their way into products of themselves and other manufacturers if they were selling their solutions over the next decade or so. And it wasn't necessarily that breakdown that they generated, which was quite game-changing, but it was how they actually did it. So what they did here is, first of all, a very clear timeline in today's roadmaps as we use them. And then the very clear architecture here on the left. In this case, it was the breakdown of technology features or of technologies. And at the bottom here, you see the products. And that gave a very clear understanding in terms of how it works in that R&D department. Now, what they did is they generated this one in a consensus way. So they used an interaction with the stakeholders who had the knowledge there. And then based on their best understanding of the current state, of the future state, of the development steps that go into it, produced this roadmap, which was then accompanied by a minority report. And that is something that they pioneered quite heavily, but something we don't actually see these days a lot when we do road mapping, which is a shame. Because in that minority report, you actually explain, if it's done correctly, why am I actually picking a certain path, not another one, and what have I dropped from the roadmap? And looking back at success and failure out there in strategic planning, we always talk about why an organization succeeded. That's always very easy to see. It's always very easy to tell an organization why they completely failed. But to understand why I might not have performed to the utmost, but kind of ended up somewhere in the middle. For that, I need to look back at my historic decisions and strategy. And those minority reports, they would actually help me understand why was something excluded at a particular point in time. What they also did is they updated that frequently. And that's something that I would like to bring to your attention. It's that a roadmap is not a static picture that you do once and then you forget about it, put it on the wall and you're proud of your roadmap. But it should be something that you work with on a regular basis, review it at least annually. But sometimes if conditions change around you, you can even look at it quarterly or more often to understand, is my strategy still valid in this rapidly changing environment in which we're operating? And then obviously the right side of the roadmap is always a bit fluffy. We can't really plan 10 years ahead. We don't know what's going to happen until then. So just because something is on a roadmap doesn't mean it is set in stone. It's almost like you imagine the innovation funnel, where you have the fuzzy front end on the left side, and then as you're going through the funnel, everything gets more tangible. You might as well say you're kind of flipping that funnel around with the fuzzy front end on the right side, and everything on the right side of the roadmap, it's still a little bit in limbo. It's a bit uncertain what we're doing there. Development is still going on. We might kick it out completely. However, as the projects move closer to you in the timeline, they become more tangible. And essentially what is on the left side here, those things are often set in stone because manufacturing processes are aligned with it. The factory might have been built. The supply chains are in place. So we don't want to change anything in the near term. But the further we go out into the future, the more fuzzier our roadmap becomes. And that's something to consider in your strategic planning when you're involving different stakeholder groups, that there are notions of hesitations when you're creating roadmaps of, should I really put that on there? Would it look bad if I take it off in a couple of years' time? And my argument is always, I'd rather have it on the roadmap with a question mark than end up at a point in a couple of years where we say, well, we talked about it, never put it on, should have considered it. So it's easier to ignore something on the roadmap than to not have it and then be disappointed that you didn't include it. So that's essentially long ramble, but that's how road mapping started. And like you can see here on this little timeline, really dates back 50-ish years now. So road mapping is not a new invention, but in these days, it's getting increasingly popular with all sorts of organizations. Let's forward in that timeline a little bit to about 20 years ago. That's when Rob from the IfM, from who I stole a lot of slides for today's presentation, he started doing an intensive amount of research on road mapping at the Institute for Manufacturing in Cambridge, and really unraveled this whole concept of strategic planning to put it in a more structured approach. And one of his big ideas was also to say, we don't need to have this lengthy planning process. Back then, strategic planning was often associated with some very detailed, very lengthy processes. And what Rob did is put his effort into what he refers to as fast start approaches. So getting started with road mapping very quickly. And he then wrote papers on the T-plan methodology, which is technology road mapping, the S-plan, which is for strategic higher level road mapping. And those concepts that were developed 20 plus years ago still hold true today. We're still working with those approaches, even though obviously they're changing somewhat. But it's that notion of quickly getting started, doing a roadmap that's not perfect, but in the right direction, and then quickly iterating. That is something that is important in my understanding. And since then, obviously, road mapping emerged a lot. It was combined with different tools, different activities. And these days, the research is no longer concerned with how do we do a roadmap. That's quite clear. And we can see in the solutions like from ITONICS that road mapping has found its way into the software world as well and is represented with good solutions in the market. But now we are always questioning, how can we make the quality of the data better? So Rob, for example, is looking at combining SWOT analyses with road mapping, different management tools. And we're living this whole concept of road mapping is not a standalone tool, but rather the center of a toolkit. And all those different approaches you're doing in the organization need to tie in with a roadmap. And unfortunately, that is where the challenge is coming from. Because every organization is different. It's very hard to standardize something like this. And that is why starting small, trying something out in your organization is a good starting point. Independent of how you're doing it, independent of the roadmap you're doing, I think we can summarize it that road mapping is the application of, as Rob and Clive said, a temporal, spatial, structured strategic lens. Essentially, it's the way in which we're looking at the strategy. And that lens that we're using here, that can vary depending on how we're doing it. It could be a product focus. It could be a feature focus that we're doing here. It could be a market focus. And depending on how we're looking at it, the way in which the roadmap is structured can take different shapes. But independent of that, the road mapping process for us is the means of creating that picture. And it's this dialogue that brings the stakeholders together and that brings us to the strategic decisions. The roadmap at the end is just the picture. And that is important because that picture, it needs to appeal to the audience. If you don't like the picture, you will not look at it in detail. And that is why when Emily showed those different ways in which road mapping can be done in software these days, it really helps us boil down to the key information that is required by a certain stakeholder at the right time. And that allows us to make sound strategic decisions. In terms of what we want to show in the roadmap, I'm going to show you the framework that underpins it all. So we want to figure out what should we actually be doing in future. That's how typically the discussions start. And then there is a bit of push and pull that somebody from the top says, hey, we have a market need, and because of that, we should do something. And then there is the technology expert who says, ooh, technology, I like that. I want to bring that into a product. And there's a mismatch there between what the market needs, what we want to push from our technology base into the market. So road mapping comes in here by first of all answering the question, which should be the first in an ideal world. Like, why do we actually want to act? Why do we want to do something different to the way that we're doing it right now or have done it in the past? And there we're looking at changes in the market, competitive behaviors, political trends, technological development, consumer behavior changes. All of that is impacting us. And none of that is happening at the same time. So we always need to bring in the timeline and understand at what point in the future will this become relevant for us. And then once we understand that, that's when we can really talk about what we should be doing, i.e., where do we actually want to go? Where do we see our product pipeline or our organization in 5, 10, or 15 years. Once we have defined that, we can look at where we are right now, the current state. And that essentially shows us a big gap in the middle. We know where we are, we know what our capabilities are, we know in the future we need something much better or very different from right now. So the next question we have to ask ourselves is, how can we actually get there? How do we move from now to the future, bearing in mind we can't go from zero to hero, but we have to do stepping stones, product iterations, technology iterations, introducing different generations of our solutions over the time. Once we understand that, we look at the bottom part and say, how can we actually do that? What are the resources that we need, the capabilities we need to build up in the firm in order to do that? And that is all there is to road mapping in essence. It's why do we need to act, what should we do, and how do we do it, considering the entire time frame for which we want to do our strategy. And that leads us essentially to our roadmap once we have answered all of those questions. And as you can see on this lovely picture here, there's many arrows going in all sorts of directions. Sometimes they're overlapping. And you'll find quite often that not only has the roadmap be tailored to your application, obviously, but also there might not be just one best way or one single way of reaching your goal. Quite often you'll be confronted with 2 or 3 pathways that you could take for your technology development or for your route into a new market. And that's where the power of road mapping comes in, because it really allows you to discuss those different opportunities here, bring them in connection with your capabilities, with the resources that you have available, to then distill out your critical path, your chosen route to achieving your vision. When we're talking about this roadmap that then comes out of it, again, there's different focuses. So it could be that we're doing the roadmap at the technology area, where we say, what are the developments we have to do over the next 5 or 10 years? Could be that we talk about the capability growth in the firm, or sometimes we talk about some high sector level activities. Different audiences are important, and all of that one brings some different structures with it. Looking to the future, doing some reverse road mapping, working with some deep dive templates to really drill out some details. Road mapping is a vast area that we can touch on, but all of them bear one thing in common, or a couple of things in common, which is visual structuring, shared framing in order to make all those roadmaps that you do in the firm compatible with each other, and a time orientation, because without a time orientation, we don't have a strategy. We have a snapshot of what's happening right now, but road mapping is all about strategizing, and strategy needs to be seen as an evolution along a timeline towards a certain goal. One example is the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. I've worked with them over several years on multiple projects, and we did some very high-level strategy work with them to understand really, for example, how can we use the third dimension, i.e. flying objects and satellites, for reducing the lives lost at sea, or how can we improve calling for help at the seaside and at the sea. In those activities, we worked with over 70 organizations in an exploratory way to understand how could those networks of people of different organizations come together, and what solutions could we bring out together for a common cause. And that, in those workshops, triggered direct actions and projects. On the other side of the scale, we find something like a typical devices manufacturer, where the roadmaps are very detailed and broken down. And it's essentially efficiency driven. It's not about the big vision of, for example, saving lives, but it's about how can we reduce costs and be more competitive. And the roadmaps there take a much more granular approach, and rather than talking to 70 different organizations, something like 10, 15 people in the room throughout the road mapping workshops that bring their expertise in, but it's very application oriented. Emily, I know that you would like to say something about that as well. So I'm just going to hand over to you for a minute.
Great. Thank you. And thanks for sharing those examples. I think they're great illustrations of what road mapping can be and what it can do, also very different. But I think one of the best measures of success for any roadmap is certainly what action has it generated. Either, as you said, directly informing teams, what's coming, what do they need to build or prepare for, or what conversations has it sparked, or trade-offs has it surfaced, has it helped decision makers align and act. And with that, that's the lens I want to use now, as I take you through a quick look at how road mapping actually works inside of ITONICS and how the tool supports some of the principles we've talked about today. So I shall just share my screen. And of course, ITONICS offers a lot of different features and functions with road mapping, but for today, I just want to focus on a few of the core benefits that make road mapping easier, more collaborative, and ultimately more impactful. So first off, we have flexibility or agility. And one of the things we emphasized in the webinar and today as well is that you should start small, but start somewhere. And that's exactly what you can do here. So when you create a roadmap in ITONICS, you're not just staring at a blank screen. You can choose from ready-to-use templates, whether it's product road mapping, capability planning, or strategic initiatives. And these come pre-structured, but are fully customizable. So you can still start small and then evolve the structure as your process matures. But let's look at one of the exemplary roadmaps we have here. And this is a simple product roadmap that shows planned feature development across different work streams. And at the top, we have clear release milestones, so everyone knows what major delivery cycles to work toward. And this kind of structure is really helpful in ensuring there's no duplication of efforts, that the sequence of work makes sense, and that critical enablers like security and API access or analytics infrastructure are delivered in sync with the product goals. And this kind of structure is really helpful in ensuring that at the same time, you can remain flexible. So if priorities shift, if a dependency changes, or if feedback requires a new direction, those changes can be reflected quickly and transparently. And now let's move to a more layered example. So here we have a strategic roadmap, and this shows multiple teams, each with their own work streams, and therefore they can collaborate in this one shared space. So you'll notice that there's sub-layers for things like research, testing, deployment. So each team can also map activities to their stage of work. So let's say team CA1 is preparing for a product launch in the US, while team CBX is testing critical infrastructure. All of that is captured here, and each team owns their track, but the interconnections, all these lines in between, are visible to all, which makes cross-team collaboration a whole lot easier. And that brings us to transparency. So this roadmap is not a static document, as we've talked about. It's not a file that gets emailed around and versioned or eventually forgotten. It's live and shared. So when someone adjusts a milestone, which you can do here by changing the date, then everyone sees the same thing. You can also drag that, simple like that. So everyone, and you can also add linkages between things. So now everyone sees the same changes live and collaboratively. So that prevents the sort of version chaos that we often see, and also speeds up decision making and accountability across teams. And finally, what I think is one of the most powerful aspects of a tool like this is how indeed it enables that strategic linkage. Because no roadmap exists in isolation, as we know, they're shaped by your broader innovation and business ecosystem. And by managing your roadmap in a centralized platform, you can connect information across teams and even disciplines beyond just the roadmap view. So, for example, your foresight team might surface an emerging technology, or your compliance lead might flag a tightening of regulations. And rather than keeping those insights siloed, you can link them directly to the roadmap activities they influence. So that creates not only visibility, but validation. So you can show why this initiative exists, what it's responding to, and what assumptions it depends on. And the same applies to trends, risks, startups, other ongoing projects outside of the roadmap. Anything in your innovation ecosystem you can connect. And so here we have an opportunity space or another innovation project. And this gives every roadmap item a context trail. So you can trace where it came from, what it depends on, and what it contributes to. And with that, I will hand back to you, Clemens, because I know you've got more to say on the importance of linkages and how they help roadmaps become more dynamic living tools.
Thank you, Emily. And like you know, I always have something more to say. I can keep going as long as you want. So, let's talk about those linkages that Emily showed. Just in a more simple way on my screen here. Everything's bigger here. So the linkages for us are the critical part in the roadmaps, because in the end, they tell us how everything fits together. And without the linkages, we can't decide what the critical path for us to take is, what our route to the future will be. Because there might be a certain market need, which we can address with one or two products. But then we need to understand what are the technologies that are required in order to make those products succeed. And here, in this example, it's essentially two types of cars for a particular market. And when we're talking about the technologies, we might have to talk about some completely different technologies that are success factors, such as on the right, something to do with electric charging or the electric powertrain system. On the left, could be something like in-car entertainment, something on a different domain. Could be even represented almost on its own different roadmap if we're going into more detail here. And it's for us important to understand that, for example, the in-house entertainment here in this example, we could do an in-house development to succeed, but for the other technology, we might need a strategic partner. And only once we have those linkages drawn up, we can only understand that for satisfying a particular market need, we need to partner with someone unless we truly focus on the sports car in product 2, because product 1 requires a strategic partner. And that means we can, with established linkages, aggregate everything from the lowest level of our strategic planning all the way up and understand now what is the impact at market level, at organizational level of our strategy. And that's what makes it so immensely powerful. So it's the roadmap content, but also we can use those linkages for understanding what is actually not just the connection here, but what is the importance of it. And I'll show you in a moment what we mean by that. It's important to understand that the roadmap, it's a strategic document. So at some point we need to connect it with a prioritization to understand where do we focus our money and how much money are we actually putting towards those projects. Without the linkages, it's a bit of, thumb in the air, guessing the best one, but with the linkages, we can be very precise in that. And when I said I'm going to show you some examples, I'm going to do exactly that. On the left side, it's a representation of a simple linkage between two layers. So essentially, it's like setting a tick box in your software where you say technology 1 addresses product 1, product 2, and product 3. So we know technology 1 appears in 3 of our products, whereas technology 2 only appears in 2 of them. So we might say, well, actually, in that case, one is more important than the other. Or we might say, well, we need to prioritize them in a certain way. We can also very easily see that product 3 requires 4 different technologies, probably a lot harder to implement then product 5 that only requires one particular technology. So in essence, it's a way for us to also explore what is the risk and what is the complexity associated with different solutions we're trying to bring out there. If we want to take this further and not just think about the simple linkages, we often create impact analyses here, impact grids, where we say, well, the impact of a certain technology on a product might be low, medium, high in a simple way. And this allows us to then see, if there might be competing technologies like technology 1 and technology 3, they might be doing some similar solutions like Blu-ray and DVD, kind of achieving the same goal, but competing technologies. They might have a different degree of impact on a particular product or a particular driver or any other activity that you link it to. And that's going to help you make more structured, more systematic strategic decisions if you're switching to this analysis of the type of impact that one layer has on the next. And the challenge here is, where do we stop? Because without linkages, a roadmap is not very powerful because it's missing all that information. But with the linkages, the data quality is at risk because if we're adding more and more information to the roadmap, at some point, somebody has to keep all of this one updated and at a high quality level. Because if we are putting in information in the roadmap that we can no longer trust, then we're essentially putting rubbish into the roadmap, and rubbish in, rubbish out. If we can't trust information in our database, we can't trust the roadmap that we're getting out of it. So everyone always wants to have this roadmap where at the click of one button, a perfect strategy comes out and the strategic view is automatically updated because so much data is inside the system. But remember, somebody actually has to manage that. So when you're starting up, it's best to start just with the necessary linkages, keep it very simple, and then as you're getting more proficient in your roadmap, you've tried it, you've experienced it in more than one application, then you can start expanding it. And I think that's the nice thing about working with a software that has all those solutions built in already. It's there for when you need it, but you can still start in a very simple way. Talking about a simple way, just give you a very brief outlook to what's coming up. In one of the next sessions, we'll be talking about toolkits. Because for us, like I said, road mapping, it's not just the roadmap itself. It's how do we leverage the road mapping or the roadmap's architecture by connecting it to all those other different analyses that we're running in the firm. So bear that in mind. But we'll talk about this in a dedicated session in one of the upcoming webinars. Emily, over to you to talk about the Academy in general.
Yes, thanks. And thank you for teasing some of our upcoming sessions. So that's right. We will have some follow-up courses, this as the first part of a larger sort of packaged course on road mapping that we're lucky to have Clemens support us with. And so keep an eye out for a follow-up email where we'll share more information on that. But I also want to, you're all here through ITONICS Academy, so I also want to remind you that if you're interested in continuing your innovation learning journey, you can check out the full course catalog in the ITONICS Academy, which covers sort of end-to-end innovation topics from strategic foresight and competitive intelligence to ideation, venture clienting, portfolio management, and of course, road mapping. So all of these courses are free and on demand, and completion of a course will earn you an innovation certificate from ITONICS. I also want to, as in our webinar, I also want to share that Clemens has kindly offered to do a one-on-one free consulting session with you that we'll also share the link for that. So you can book that if you want to get into the details of your specific pain points around road mapping. And as always, you can get in touch with us at ITONICS if you want to learn more about our road mapping tool and how to get started simply yet decisively. So as I said, all of that will be available in a follow-up email from today, including the slides from this presentation and how to get started with the next steps.
Thank you, Emily. And I think the one thing I just want to add is that road mapping, it's a long journey to really implement it in an organization. But to get started, it can be very easy. Get together a couple of people from your organization, sit down, frame the question, why are we doing road mapping? What are we trying to get out of it? Because it's the insight that count, not the final picture. And then just go through the process of the why, what, and how. Where do we want to get to? Where are we now? And how do we actually move forward? And you will see that even within an hour and a half, you probably surface a lot of knowledge gaps, a lot of insights, and a lot of aha moments. So just give it a try and get started with it.
Great. Thanks, Clemens. That's my favorite takeaway, is just to get the right people in the room, ask the right questions, and get started. So, once again, thank you, everyone, today. Thank you, Dr. Chaskel. And
My pleasure.
Shall see you in the next ITONICS live course on road mapping.
Looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.